Kwame Mensah was a man who loved being admired. In the busy streets of Accra, his name carried weight. He owned several shops, drove the newest car in town, and people often called him Chief, even though he was just a trader. He liked how people respected him. Every morning when he walked through the market, workers would greet him, and he would smile proudly, thinking life could not get better. At home, his wife Abina was the opposite of him. She was quiet, kind, and humble. She worked as a teacher at the local school and always came home smiling, even when tired. Their small but beautiful house was filled with her care. She made sure the flowers in the yard were fresh, the food on the table was warm, and the house smelled like peace. Kwame often said she was a good woman, but deep down, he wished she was more like the women he saw in the city, bold, loud, and full of charm. One afternoon, while visiting one of his shops, Kwame met a young woman named Amma. She was lively and full of laughter. She worked at a nearby clothing stall and was quick with her words. When she smiled, Kwame felt something he had not felt in years, a rush of excitement. Amma called him Mr. Mensah at first, but when she realized who he was, her tone softened, and her eyes shone with admiration. Kwame liked that feeling. It made him feel powerful again. Days turned into weeks, and Kwame found himself visiting Amma's stall more often. He told himself it was just business, that he was checking on fabrics or prices, but in truth, he enjoyed her company. She made him laugh in a way Abina no longer did. She complimented his clothes, his car, and his confidence. Kwame started to think that maybe he deserved more from life. He had worked hard for his success. Why shouldn't he enjoy it? At home, Abina noticed the changes. Kwame began coming home late. He stopped asking about her day. He started dressing differently, using new perfume, and smiling to himself when his phone rang. Abina's heart grew heavy, but she said nothing. She still cooked his favorite meals, still greeted him at the door, still prayed for him every night. She believed that love, no matter how shaken, could still be healed with patience. One evening, Kwame returned home smelling of perfume that was not Abina's. She noticed it but stayed silent. Instead, she served him dinner and quietly sat across the table, watching him eat. Kwame felt her eyes on him but ignored them. In his mind, he had already justified his actions. He told himself Abina was too simple to understand the kind of life he wanted now. He convinced himself that he wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just living freely. But deep down, Kwame knew he was crossing a line. Amma, on the other hand, enjoyed the attention. She was young and had never been treated so kindly by a man with money. Kwame bought her gifts, gold earrings, new dresses, and even a smartphone. Soon, whispers began spreading around the market. People saw them together and wondered how long before Abina would find out. When a friend finally told her, Abina felt her chest tighten. But she did not cry in public. She went home, locked the door, and let her tears fall in silence. That night, she prayed not for Kwame to come back to her, but for the strength to stay calm. She told herself that anger would only hurt her more. She still loved him, but she was slowly realizing that love could not fix a man who had lost respect for his home. Meanwhile, Kwame's pride grew stronger. He believed he could handle both women. When he was with Abina, he acted like the loving husband. When he was with Amma, he acted like a free man. He thought he was clever, but in truth, he was digging a hole for himself, one that pride would not help him escape. His mother noticed the change in him one afternoon. She came to visit and saw the distance between him and Abina. After dinner, she called him aside. "Kwame," she said gently, "a man who forgets the hand that built his peace will soon find himself in the cold." Kwame laughed it off and said, "Mama, I'm fine. Everything is under control." But her words stayed with him like a quiet echo in his mind. Amma began to expect more from Kwame. More time, more gifts, more promises. Kwame found himself lying to both women, always running between them, always pretending. The excitement that once felt like freedom started to feel like pressure. Sometimes he would sit in his car, looking at his reflection in the rearview mirror, and wonder what he had become. But then he would shrug it off, telling himself that men like him deserved to live boldly. At home, Abina's eyes lost their sparkle. She still spoke softly, still smiled when needed, but there was a sadness behind her calmness. Even their neighbors began to notice. One day, A small boy in her class asked her why she always looked tired. She smiled weakly and said, "Sometimes adults forget to rest." The truth was, Abina's heart was breaking slowly, one quiet night after another. But she kept her faith. She believed that everything hidden would one day come to light. One Sunday morning, as church bells rang through the air, Abina sat by the window while Kwame got ready to leave. He told her he was going to meet a friend, but she knew where he was going. She didn't stop him. Instead, she whispered a short prayer, "God, open his eyes before it's too late." Kwame didn't hear her words. He left with his usual confidence, driving away with a smile on his face, not knowing that pride and deceit were waiting to destroy everything he had built. And so, while the city of Accra continued its busy rhythm, one house on the corner of the street grew quieter each day. Inside it, a woman with a strong heart held her pain in silence, while her husband walked the path that would soon teach him the hardest lesson of his life. The night was warm and quiet when Kwame returned home. The sound of crickets filled the air, and the moonlight rested softly on the veranda. Abina was in the kitchen, preparing his favorite meal of jollof rice and fried fish. She heard his footsteps and quickly wiped her hands, ready to greet him. But the look on his face was strange, calm, but distant. He didn't greet her with his usual charm. Instead, he sat down heavily on the chair and began playing with his phone. Abina smiled gently and said, "Your food is almost ready, Kwame." He didn't answer at first. Then, after a long silence, he looked up and said, "Abina, there's something I want to talk about." She turned, her hands trembling slightly. "Yes, Kwame." He cleared his throat. "I think it's time you got to know Amma." Abina froze. The knife she was using to cut onions slipped slightly from her fingers. "Amma?" she asked softly, as if she had misheard. "Yes," he said casually. "Amma. I don't want tension between you two. People in the market talk, and I don't like it. It would be easier if you were friends. It will make life easier for everyone." The room grew silent. Abina looked at him, searching for the husband she once knew. "You want me to be friends with the woman you are seeing?" she asked, her voice calm but heavy. Kwame nodded as if it were a simple request. "Yes. You are both grown women. There's no need for drama. You're mature, Abina. That's one of the things I respect about you." Respect. The word felt bitter in her mouth. She wanted to scream, to ask him how he could be so cruel. But she didn't. Instead, she wiped her hands on her cloth and slowly sat down. Her heart pounded, but her voice stayed steady. "If that is what you want," she said quietly, "I will try." Kwame smiled, relieved. "Good. That's my wife. I knew you'd understand." He stood up, kissed her on the forehead, and walked away as if he had just solved a small problem. When he left the room, Abina sat still for a long time. The food on the stove began to burn, but she didn't move. Her eyes filled with tears, not because she was weak, but because she could not understand how love had turned into humiliation. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the girl, Amma. What did she have that Abina didn't? Was it her youth? Her laughter? Her boldness? Abina thought of her wedding day, of the vows Kwame had made, and of how those promises now felt like ashes. The next morning, Abina woke up early, her face pale but calm. She went about her chores as usual, humming softly. Inside, her heart was heavy, but her pride kept her upright. If Kwame wanted her to meet Amma, then she would do it, but not as a defeated wife. She would meet her as a woman who deserved respect. 2 days later, Kwame came home smiling. "Amma wants to meet you," he said cheerfully. "She thinks you are an amazing woman. I told her you are very kind." Abina forced a small smile. "When?" "Tomorrow," he replied. "I'll take you there after work." The next day came too quickly. Abina dressed simply in a plain white dress and tied her headscarf neatly. Her hands were shaking, but her face remained calm. Kwame drove her through the crowded streets until they reached a small cafe by the roadside. There, sitting at a corner table, was Amma. Amma stood up when she saw them. She was younger than Abina had imagined, beautiful, confident, and full of life. She greeted Abina politely, almost shyly. "Good afternoon, Ma," she said. "Good afternoon," Abina replied softly. Kwame smiled, pleased with himself. "See? This isn't so bad," he said. "Now you two can talk. I'll get some drinks." When he walked away, an awkward silence fell between the two women. Abina looked at Amma carefully, and Amma looked down at her hands, twisting her bracelet nervously. "I didn't want this to happen," Amma said suddenly, her voice quiet. "I didn't mean to hurt you." Abina blinked, surprised. "Then why are you still with him?" Amma hesitated. "Because he promised he would take care of me. He said you two were only married in name." Abina gave a small, sad smile. "That's what men say when they want two worlds." Amma looked ashamed. For the first time, she saw the pain in Abina's eyes, not anger, but deep sorrow. "You are a good woman," Amma whispered. "I can see that." Abina nodded slowly. "You are not my enemy, Amma. My husband's weakness is his pride. You are only caught in it." Before Amma could answer, Kwame returned, laughing as if everything was fine. He placed drinks on the table and said, "Good. Now my two favorite women can be friends." Abina looked at him and smiled faintly, though her heart ached. She said nothing more. She sipped her drink slowly while Amma avoided Kwame's gaze. Later, on the way home, Kwame kept talking about how proud he was of her. "You see, you're so understanding. Not every woman could do that." Abina stared out the window, the city lights passing by like fading stars. She didn't answer him. Inside, she was slowly building a wall, one made of silence, dignity, and strength. When they reached home, she went straight to her room and sat by the mirror. She looked at her reflection and whispered to herself, "I did not agree because I am weak. I agreed because I needed to see the truth with my own eyes." In the following days, she met Amma a few more times, mostly in the market or at small gatherings. Each time, Abina spoke gently and respectfully, even when it hurt. People began whispering about how mature she was, how she could still smile despite her husband's betrayal. But only she knew the battle she fought each day, the battle between love and self-respect. Amma grew more uncomfortable around Kwame. She started noticing the way he talked down to Abina, the way he ignored her pain. The more she saw, the more she realized that the man she admired was not as noble as she once thought. Abina, meanwhile, began to change. She spoke less, but her silence carried power. She stopped asking where Kwame was going. She stopped waiting for him to come home. Instead, she began focusing on herself, her work, her peace, her prayers. Kwame, blind to what was happening, thought he had achieved harmony. But what he didn't see was that the two women he tried to control were beginning to see through his lies. That night, as Abina lay in bed, she felt a strange calmness wash over her. The pain was still there, but it was softer now, almost distant. She realized that she could not control what Kwame did, but she could control how she responded. And that quiet strength made her feel free for the first time in a long while. Outside, the city hummed with life. Inside, a woman sat in the shadows, her dignity shining brighter than any light. She knew that the storm was far from over, but she also knew that she would no longer break. The days that followed were quiet but heavy. Kwame believed he had done something wise by bringing peace between his wife and his lover. He often told his friends that he was a man who could manage women, and they laughed and praised his cleverness. But inside his own home, a different story was growing, one that he did not understand. Abina began visiting Amma from time to time, not because she wanted to, but because she wanted to keep her heart from turning bitter. She told herself that hatred would only destroy her peace. When she met Amma in the market, she greeted her kindly, helped her carry goods, and even gave her small advice about life. Amma was surprised at first. She expected anger or insults, but Abina's calmness left her confused. One morning, Abina visited Amma's stall with a small basket of fruits. "You work so hard," she said softly, placing the basket on the table. "You should eat well." Amma looked at her with disbelief. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked. "After everything." Abina smiled weakly. "Because anger will not change what has happened. And maybe one day, you will see things clearly for yourself." Amma couldn't find words. She watched Abina walk away, her steps steady and graceful, and for the first time, she felt ashamed, not just for what she had done, but for believing Kwame's lies. As days passed, they began to talk more. Sometimes they met in the shade behind the market and shared water or lunch. Amma would tell small stories about her life, how she grew up in a poor village, how she came to the city to find work, and how she met Kwame. She admitted that she had been drawn to his confidence and the way he made promises. "He told me he was lonely," Amma said one afternoon. "He said you didn't care for him anymore." Abina listened quietly. Her eyes softened, but she did not interrupt. When Amma finished, she said, "He said the same kind of things to me. That he worked too hard, that I didn't understand his struggles. It seems he likes to tell each of us what makes him look innocent." Amma nodded slowly. "I see it now. He plays with words. He makes you feel special, then uses that to control you." That was the moment a small bond began between them. They both realized they had been deceived by the same man, wrapped in the same net of pride and charm. Amma started noticing things she had ignored before. When Kwame came to see her, she began to pay attention to how he talked about others, how he laughed too loudly, how he avoided questions. He once told her, "Abina is lucky to have a man like me," and Amma felt a strange coldness in her heart. The next time she saw Abina, she said, "You are stronger than me." I would have shouted. I would have fought. Abina shook her head. Strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet. I am learning to be quiet and wise. Their friendship grew quietly, like a small tree finding space in dry ground. People in the market began whispering. "Look at them," one woman said, "the wife and the side woman walking together." Some laughed, some admired Abina's calmness, and others called her foolish. But Abina did not care about people's words. She had stopped living to please others long ago. One rainy afternoon, Amma came to Abina's house. Her face was pale, and her eyes were red. Abina opened the door and asked, "What's wrong?" Amma broke down crying. "I can't do it anymore," she said. "He lies to me every day. He says one thing to me and another to you. I feel used. I feel dirty." Abina led her inside and gave her a towel to dry herself. "Sit," she said gently. "No one can clean your heart for you. You must do it yourself. But you are welcome here." They sat together for a long time as the rain fell outside. For the first time, Amma felt safe, not as Kwame's lover, but as a woman who could finally speak the truth. She confessed everything she knew, everything Kwame had promised her. Abina listened quietly, her eyes filled with pain but also with pity. Later that evening, Kwame came home to find Amma sitting in his living room. He froze at the door. "What is this?" he asked, trying to sound calm. Amma stood up, her voice trembling but firm. "We were just talking," she said. "Talking?" Kwame laughed nervously. "About what?" Abina stood beside her, her face calm but strong. "About the truth," she said. "The truth you have been hiding between us." Kwame's smile faded. He looked from one woman to the other, unsure of what to say. For the first time, he realized the power he thought he had was slipping away. The two women he believed he controlled were now standing together, united by honesty, not jealousy. He tried to turn the situation into a joke, but Amma stopped him. "No, Kwame," she said, her eyes full of tears. "You used both of us. You told me lies. You made me believe she was cold and cruel. But she is not. You are the one who turned love into pain." Kwame's voice rose. "Watch your words." Abina raised her hand gently. "There's no need to shout," she said. "This house has heard enough shouting in silence." He looked at her, confused. She was not angry, not crying, just calm. And that calmness scared him more than any scream would have. Amma left soon after that, but she and Abina continued to meet secretly. Their conversations became deeper, no longer about Kwame but about life, strength, and womanhood. Amma said once, "You have taught me something I never learned in school, that kindness can be stronger than revenge." Abina smiled. "And you have taught me that forgiveness is not the same as forgetting." Kwame, meanwhile, started feeling restless. He could not understand why Amma avoided his calls or why Abina no longer questioned him. The control he once enjoyed had vanished. Every time he came home, the silence in the house felt louder. One evening, He sat alone in his car, watching the lights of the city. He remembered how proud he had been, how he thought he could have both women under his power. But now, he felt small, like a man surrounded by the shadows of his own choices. At home, Abina and Amma shared a meal for the last time. They both knew the end of this story was near. "He will not change," Amma said quietly. "I know," Abina replied. "But we will." That night, when Abina closed her door and Amma walked into the rain, both women felt a strange sense of peace. They had faced pain and betrayal, but they had also found something greater: truth, respect, and courage. Kwame thought he had tied their hearts together, but instead, he had freed them both. And as dawn broke over Accra, two women walked their separate paths, their hearts lighter than they had been in a long time, while one man sat alone, wondering how his lies had become the silence that surrounded him. The morning sun rose over Accra, soft and golden, but Amma felt no warmth in it. She had not slept all night. Her heart was heavy with guilt that no words could ease. For weeks, she had tried to ignore the voice inside her, but it had grown louder each day. The truth had become too heavy to hide. She sat by the window of her small room, watching people pass by on the street. Children laughed, traders shouted, and life went on, but inside her, everything was still. She thought of Abina's kind face, her calm voice, her quiet strength. She thought of all the lies she had helped Kwame hide, all the tears she had caused. Finally, she stood up, wiped her eyes, and said softly to herself, "I can't do this anymore." Amma took a deep breath, wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, and walked through the busy streets to Abina's home. Her steps were slow, each one heavier than the last. When she reached the door, she hesitated for a long moment before knocking. Abina opened the door. She looked tired, but her eyes were gentle. "Amma," she said quietly, "you look troubled." Amma nodded, tears already spilling down her cheeks. "I came to tell you the truth," she said. "All of it." Abina stepped aside and let her in. They sat on the sofa, the same place where many quiet talks had happened before. The air was heavy with silence. Amma began to speak. She told Abina everything: how Kwame had promised to marry her, how he spoke lies about Abina, how he had used both of them to feed his pride. She confessed every detail, every moment that had made her feel powerful but left her empty. When she finished, her voice broke. "I am so sorry," she whispered. "You showed me kindness when I didn't deserve it. You treated me like a sister when I took your peace." Abina's eyes filled with tears, but she did not speak right away. She looked out the window, watching the sunlight fall on the floor. Then she said softly, "The truth always comes at a cost. You have paid yours, Amma. Now you must forgive yourself and walk away from this." Amma covered her face with her hands and cried. Abina moved closer and placed a hand on her shoulder. There was no anger in her touch, only quiet forgiveness. For a long time, they sat like that, two women broken by the same man, yet healed by their own honesty. When Amma finally stood to leave, she said, "I am leaving Accra. I need to start over." Abina nodded. "Go in peace, Amma. Don't let this story define you. Let it teach you." After she left, the house felt even quieter than before. Abina walked slowly to her bedroom. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her hands. The woman in the mirror looked older, wiser, and stronger. She had lost much, but she had kept her dignity. That evening, Abina made her decision. She went to the small wardrobe and began to pack her things. She folded her clothes neatly, placed her books in a bag, and took a deep breath before removing her wedding ring. It was heavy with memories, some sweet, some bitter. She held it for a moment, then placed it gently on the table. Before leaving, she walked around the house one last time. Every corner held a story. The kitchen where she had cooked for Kwame with love, the veranda where they used to laugh, the living room where silence had grown thicker than words. She whispered, "Goodbye," and stepped outside. The evening air was cool. She walked down the dusty road with only one small suitcase. Neighbors watched her quietly, but she didn't stop to explain. She had no anger in her heart, only peace. When Kwame returned home later that night, he was humming a tune. He had spent the day with friends, laughing and bragging as usual. He opened the door, expecting to smell Abina's cooking. But the house was silent. The lights were off. "Abina," he called out. No answer. He checked the bedroom, the kitchen, even the backyard. Everything was in its place, except her. Her clothes were gone. Her shoes were missing. And on the table, next to a folded scarf, was her wedding ring. Kwame stared at it for a long time. His chest tightened, and for the first time in years, he felt truly alone. He sank into a chair, holding the ring in his hand. "She wouldn't leave me," he whispered. "She wouldn't." But she had. Days passed, and word spread quickly through the town. People whispered behind his back. "Did you hear? Abina left him." Some laughed quietly. Some said it was only a matter of time. Even his friends stopped visiting as often. Without Abina's calm presence, Kwame's house lost its peace. The meals were cold, the air was heavy, and the silence grew louder each day. He tried to call Amma, but her number was no longer active. She had disappeared completely. Soon, his business began to crumble. The traders he trusted started turning away from him. Some deals failed, others were lost because of his anger and distraction. He made mistakes he never used to make. The proud, confident Kwame began to change. He became restless, snapping at workers, drinking more, and sleeping less. His mirror became his enemy. He could not look at himself without seeing the emptiness behind his eyes. The man who once walked the market with pride now walked with shame. One evening, he sat alone in his shop, surrounded by silence. The shelves that were once full were now half empty. The laughter of his workers was gone. He thought of Abina, how she used to greet him with a smile, how she prayed for him, how she stayed patient even when he didn't deserve it. He realized too late what he had lost. He went home and sat in the dark. The house felt cold, lifeless. He called out her name once more, Abina, but only the echo answered him. He buried his face in his hands and whispered, "I thought I was strong. I thought I could control everything." The next morning, he walked through the market, but people no longer greeted him with respect. Some looked away, others smirked. His old friends made jokes at his expense. "Chief Kwame," one said mockingly, "where are your two queens now?" He forced a smile, pretending not to care, but inside he was breaking. Every step he took felt heavier than the last. That night, he sat outside his house, staring at the stars. The city lights flickered in the distance, but he felt far away from all of it. For the first time in his life, he understood what pride had cost him. He whispered to the empty night, "I had everything, and I threw it away." And somewhere, far from the noise and pain, Abina slept peacefully for the first time in years. She no longer carried the weight of betrayal. She had left behind a house full of memories but walked into a life filled with freedom. Kwame remained alone, surrounded by silence, the silence he had built with his own hands. Months passed, and the city of Accra moved on, as it always did. New stories replaced old ones, and the gossip about Kwame and Abina slowly faded from people's lips. But far from the noise and judgment, Abina began to build something new, something that gave her life meaning again. She had moved to a quiet town on the edge of the city, where the streets were lined with trees and the mornings were filled with birdsong. The air there felt lighter, freer. With the little savings she had left, she rented a small house and turned it into a school for girls. It had only 2 rooms, a chalkboard, and a few wooden benches, but it was full of hope. Each morning, young girls from the neighborhood came running to her door. Some were shy, some were curious, but all of them came eager to learn. Abina greeted them with her warm smile, the same smile that had once been buried under pain. She taught them reading, writing, and counting, but more than that, she taught them lessons about life, respect, and courage. She often told them stories from her own experience, though she never mentioned names. She would say, "A woman's worth is not found in who loves her, but in how she loves herself." The girls listened quietly, their eyes wide with admiration. At first, life was not easy. There were days when Abina struggled to pay rent or buy enough chalk for her lessons. Sometimes she went to bed hungry, but she never complained. Each morning she rose with determination, knowing that what she was building was bigger than herself. One afternoon, a man from the community center visited her school. He had heard about her work and wanted to see it for himself. As he watched the girls recite poems and sing songs about bravery, he was deeply moved. "Madam Abina," he said, "you are changing lives here." She smiled humbly. I am only planting seeds. The world will see their flowers later. Meanwhile, Amma had built a new life in another city. She found work at a small community office, helping women start small businesses. Her laughter slowly returned, softer and wiser than before. Sometimes, in quiet moments, she thought about Abina and whispered a prayer for her. She knew that without Abina's forgiveness, she might never have found the courage to change. One day, Amma received a letter. It was from one of the girls at Abina's school, written in neat handwriting. The girl wrote, "Teacher Abina says forgiveness is freedom. She said you were brave to start over." Amma held the letter close to her chest and smiled. She realized that her story had not ended in shame, it had turned into a lesson that others could learn from. Back in Accra, Kwame's life had taken a different path. The proud trader who once walked through the market with his head high was now a shadow of himself. His business had shrunk, his friends had vanished. When he walked through the same streets, people barely looked at him. The respect he once demanded had turned into quiet pity. He lived alone in the big house that now felt too large and too silent. The laughter, the smell of home-cooked meals, the gentle hum of Abina's singing, everything was gone. Only the echo of his own footsteps filled the rooms. Sometimes, late at night, he would sit on the veranda, staring into the dark sky. He thought of Abina and Amma, of their smiles, their forgiveness, and the peace they had found without him. He remembered the way Abina used to pray for him, and the way Amma used to laugh when she believed his lies. Each memory cut deep. He tried to call Abina once, but her number was no longer active. He asked around, but no one knew where she had gone. It was as if she had vanished into the wind, leaving only silence behind. One Sunday morning, Kwame walked to the church they used to attend together. He sat in the back pew, quietly listening to the choir sing. The pastor's words seemed to reach straight into his heart. "Pride destroys faster than fire," the pastor said. "And when love turns to pride, a man loses everything worth keeping." Kwame lowered his head and wept silently. It was the first time he had cried in years. Elsewhere, Abina's school continued to grow. More girls joined, and soon a few women from the town offered to help her teach. They called the school the House of Light. On the wall near the entrance, Abina painted a simple phrase, "Strong hearts rise from broken places." Every day, she found joy in small things, the laughter of her students, the sound of chalk on the board, the way the sun shone through the classroom window. She had once thought her story ended in pain, but now she saw that it had only begun. One afternoon, while cleaning the classroom after the children had left, she found a drawing on the board. It showed a woman standing in front of a group of girls with the words written beneath, "Our teacher taught us to be brave." Abina smiled, tears welling in her eyes. That night, as she sat by the window with a cup of tea, she thought about her past, not with sadness, but with peace. She remembered Amma's tears, Kwame's pride, and her own silence. All of it had shaped her into who she had become. Far away, in a small rented room, Amma knelt beside her bed and prayed for Abina. "May she always find joy," she whispered. And in another part of the city, Kwame sat alone on his veranda, whispering her name into the wind. But the wind carried no answer. Years later, people in the town would talk about the woman who built a school out of nothing. They would say, "She was once married to a rich man who lost everything, but she found something richer, peace." Abina never sought revenge or fame. She simply lived her truth. And in that quiet truth, she became stronger than anyone had ever imagined. As for Kwame, he lived the rest of his days in the same house, surrounded by silence, the silence of the two women who had once filled his world but refused to be broken by it. And though he never saw them again, their absence spoke louder than any words ever could. In the end, Abina's story became a lesson not only for the girl she taught but for everyone who heard it, that dignity cannot be taken, that peace is worth more than pride, and that even from betrayal, something beautiful can grow.